everyone. This is Glenda Dawson. I have LD, and you are watching Glenda's Dragon's Den or hearing it on one of our podcast streaming platforms. We are on the Glenda's Magical Creations channel on the Conscious Awakening Network. And we have, thankfully, she agreed, I should state, to come back and talk to us again.
After meeting me, not too many people want to come back. So thank you.
And I'm one who does. Yeah. Right.
Welcome, Barbara Lamb. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and I'm very happy to be here again with you.
Thank you very much for actually agreeing. You know, you have such a fountain and a wealth of information and knowledge that, you know, people need to know. And we both felt you needed to come back and just give more of that, share more of that. So
okay. You know, I really enjoy sharing about this kind of information because it's so fascinating to me and to the people who experience extraterrestrial encounters, and even people who just see a UFO flying up in the sky. I mean, people really get affected by that. I've met so many people who've said, "Oh, I want you to know that when I was camping last summer in Washington State or wherever, I saw this big sighting, this big light came overhead and came kind of close. And I mean, I was excited at first, but it really kind of frightened as it seemed to come really down fast and close to me. And I don't know what happened." I said, "Well, how did that experience seem to end?" And they say, "Well, I don't know. It was just suddenly gone." Now, you see, in that little or long bit of time after the craft had come really close, the light had come close to the person, and then suddenly realizing it's gone, there could have been an hour and a half, or 2 hours that had transpired during that time that the person doesn't even know about when they were actually taken by beings onto that craft. And then, you know, a whole bunch of things might have happened to them on that craft, and they wouldn't even know it. They wouldn't even know that they were taken. So I don't say this to create fear, because a lot of people like to go out camping, myself included. I've done a lot of it, and in wilderness areas too. And it's not that, you know, anybody is in danger of that, but people who already are having experiences with extraterrestrials, whether they are aware of it or not, they might be more likely than anybody else to have a visit of that type when they're out camping, out in the wilderness, in the woods or open ground or whatever. So nowadays, it's very interesting because people who go to those remote places are sometimes having encounters with extraterrestrials, and sometimes they are having encounters, or at least being in the presence of Sasquatch beings, Bigfoot beings. So I'm, of course, very interested in that phenomenon as well, and have worked with various people in regressions where they have had experiences with Sasquatch beings. And they are having some really interesting experiences, and sometimes very positive experiences, very helpful once they get over their shock and their fear that here is this great, big, burly being covered with fur and yet with a human-like face.
Right.
I mean, you can just imagine how confusing that might be for somebody. And
I
we
don't know,
also,
Glenda's gotten used to me, so there's hope for other people, I guess.
right.
Now,
If you put
being,
on a Sasquatch suit, you'd make a great
I
Sasquatch.
don't have to put on a Sasquatch suit. I can just take off my shirt and you'll see the resemblance. So as someone who's lost consciousness, and when the ambulance came and they're like, "Did you lose consciousness?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, describe what happened." I said, "Well, the guy turned in front of me and the next thing I remember." Well, guess what? So the nice thing is that you, as a regressionist, can then work with that individual if they're willing and have them relate and fill in that time slot, because they can't make it up. In other words, when you're doing a regression, you're simply bypassing their conscious mind and getting into the subconscious where it's stored, and
Right,
just pulling out the actual events that occurred. And that's what I think people don't understand about what you do.
right.
That then they themselves can reconcile exactly what happened in that time period and document it.
Right. And in the regressions, if we're going back to a particular experience, which we very often do, I set the time and the place that they have told me about in our conscious conversation. Like, for instance, if a man who is being regressed has been wondering maybe for 20 or 30 or 40 years about an experience that he had when he was a boy. And so in our conversation before the regression, I say, well, how old do you think you were when that unusual thing happened that you're wondering about? And I don't call it an abduction. I don't try to make any guesses about what it was, but he just knows that something peculiar happened, and he always wondered what it was. So I say, okay, well, what do you remember? Well, I was visiting my grandparents and I was sleeping up in the attic. That's where their guest room was, with my brother. He was in another bunk bed. And it was one night, and there was a little window up there in the attic, kind of on the roof, kind of at its slant. And I woke up and I saw all this weird light coming in. And I thought, how could headlights of a car be way up there in the air, shining down through this attic window? So I wondered about that. And my brother was sound asleep. I would have talked to him about it, but he didn't seem to want to wake up. And then the next thing I knew, there were some others in the room. But the thing is that they weren't people. I don't know what they were, but they weren't people. And I felt really weird, and I felt myself being sort of floated up out of the bed, and the covers sort of sliding off my body. And then he'll, tell whatever else he consciously remembers. But he always wondered for decades since that incident, what happened. I mean, who were they, and what were they doing, and what was going on. So in a regression, I set the scene for him. I said, okay, you're going to go back to when you were 6 years old and you were visiting your grandparents and you were sleeping up in the attic with your brother. And there was a slanted roof and a window in the slanted roof. And that you woke up that particular night. We're going to that night, whenever it was, when you woke up and the light was coming through the window. And next thing you knew, there were these strange people, except that they weren't really people. You never seen any of them like around wherever you've gone. And it was very odd. And then you felt yourself floating up out of the bed. And so maybe that's all that he had consciously remembered. And that's all that I used to set the scene. So then I do a nice process of deeply relaxing the person who has come to me. and saying here and there that the subconscious part of the mind has recorded absolutely everything he has experienced. That's true for all of us.
Mhm.
And the subconscious part of the mind has even recorded everything that happened to the person that the person may not have been consciously aware of at the
Mhm.
time. And even all of that, whatever that was that happened, all of that is recorded in the subconscious part of your mind. So that's why we can go back and find out. The subconscious part of the mind seems to be very cooperative. In other words, if we want to know something that we either didn't know about or have forgotten about, or even something we remember consciously and we'd like to have more detail about, the subconscious part of the mind, when directed by us, will provide that information, will provide that memory.
And
So then,
subsequently closure.
pardon?
And subsequently closure.
Yes, yes, and I'm appreciating your saying that, because many people live with memories like the one I just gave you an example of for many, many years, and that they'll quite often think about it and quite often wonder about it and not know whom to talk to about it. Or if they try to, the person will say, gee, I don't know anything about that. Nothing like that's happened to me. Um, or sometimes people will make fun of it.
Mhm.
Oh, you're just hallucinating. And by the way, parents of children who have these experiences, parents will so often say things like, oh, well, you just have an active imagination. Or, well, you thought you were awake, but you were probably just really dreaming. Or maybe have an imaginary friend. A lot of children do that. But the parents very often don't take it seriously. They don't take it as real. And therefore the child just immediately knows, well, I'm going to clam up about that.
Mhm.
My parents won't even believe me. Who else would? And so they may live for years and years and years still wondering about that event. Now,
And I just want to add that this is serious stuff, and this is not something people should dabble in. This is not something you should allow anyone except an expertly trained professional
Mhm.
to
yes,
regress you, because it can get very ugly if you
Don't know yet.
play around. Right. You had said that you wanted to talk about hybrids, and believe it or not, we're already 20 minutes into this. So I want to make sure we have enough time for the other couple of things you want to discuss. What did
right.
you want to go into hybrids about?
Well, the subject of ET human hybrids
Mhm.
continues to come up since I did so much work starting around 2010, and gave a big lecture at the MUFON Symposium about hybrids in 2011. And since then, that subject has been coming to me more and more. And people who come for regressions who have not particularly or even ever thought of themselves as a hybrid, the more that we talk together, and then with the regression that we do, some of those people turn out to seem like they too are ET human hybrids.
Mhm.
So I don't remember if I said in my last talk with you all, but there are two major kinds of hybrids. One kind that I was learning about for years, first of all, was the kind of hybrids who continue to live on the ship. They never do live here on Earth, and they wouldn't be able to live on Earth because they don't have enough proportion of human in them to be able to withstand our bacteria and viruses and our density and our atmosphere, our breathing. So they continue to live and grow up and have their adult hybrid lives on the ships. And they are very often seen by people in their encounters when they're on board a spaceship. I always have them describe any beings that they see.
Mhm.
And by the way, they don't call them Syrians or Andromedans or Arcturians or Pleiadians. They don't give a name to the group because the beings usually don't give a name to themselves. They may have a name, but they don't give it to the people experiencing them. And so I just have them describe everything they can about what the various beings look like. And in the mix, sometimes on the spaceship with the extraterrestrials, they will see somebody who at first looks quite human. And they'll think, oh, there's a human man over there, or there's a human woman. But then when they look more closely, or maybe that being comes more closely to them, they realize, oh, well, I was mistaken. That one I don't think really is a human. It's just very human-like until I really notice that the eyes are different. The hair is a bit different, usually spindlier and or very, very short, bristly, straggly. And but the whole build is more like a small human man. And but no, there's some differences. This one just hardly has any nose and just has a tiny little mouth, just a little kind of slit for the mouth. So I'm wondering, turns out that particular kind of being is a hybrid. And so anyway, many hybrids live their whole lives on the spaceship. And there are some hybrids, I think that this is fairly rare as far as I know, some hybrids who can live here on Earth for a while because they have enough proportion of human DNA and material in them that they can manage to live here. I don't know if any live here actually full time their whole lives. That has yet to be revealed. But the second category of hybrids is what I know even more about, having worked with quite a number of them now. And another man, Miguel Mendonça, a writer from England, and I got together and wrote a book called Meet the Hybrids. And that was about the hybrids who are living here full time, and they were born here. And they certainly look like human beings. They are human beings, but they do have a considerable amount of extraterrestrial DNA, which has been put in them. So those hybrids are created in two major ways. One is that eggs are taken from the woman, and sperm is taken from the man, usually the woman's husband, if she has a husband, and they are taken by the extraterrestrials and mixed together. In other words, they make conception happen. And then they add some of their extraterrestrial DNA. And with all of the cases that I know about, the DNA came from more than one species of DNA. So it might come from some Pleiadian DNA and some Arcturian, some Syrian, some tall white, some small gray, some small dolphin-like beings, just to give a few. And so it may have several different species of DNA in there in the mix. And then that new little embryo is placed in the mother on another occasion. Usually she's not aware of it. and gestates in the mother here on Earth for about 1.5 to 2.5 months, during which time the woman feels pregnant and will usually go to the doctor and be examined, and he confirms, yes, indeed, you're pregnant. Now, if she is a married woman and having relations with her husband, uh, it might be a surprise that she's pregnant because maybe they hadn't been able to have children, or maybe she's been using birth control faithfully, but here she is pregnant. But at least she's been with her husband, so it's not too shocking. But there are girls, teenagers, and women who suddenly realize that they're pregnant, and it gets confirmed by the doctor. And they say, but doctor, I have not been with a man, in some cases, maybe for 5 years, or in the case of a teenager, it might be ever. I haven't been with a boy ever. So how could I be pregnant? Well, the doctors don't have any answer for that. And probably the doctors, I'm guessing, are thinking inside themselves, oh, yeah, sure, you just didn't want to admit it.
Right.
You've been with somebody. So anyway, the person is pregnant, and it's validated, as I said. And then after maybe 2.5 months, she realizes one day, that's strange. I don't feel those pregnancy feelings anymore.
Mhm.
And she might go to the doctor again, and the doctor will say, well, no, you don't seem to be pregnant. And she'll say, well, how could that be? And he says, well, you must have had a miscarriage. She said, no, I didn't. I would have noticed that.
Mhm.
And he said, well, maybe you don't want to admit it, but you had an abortion. She said, no, I definitely did not have an abortion, but it's gone. So the doctors will often explain that by saying that, well, sometimes the embryo pulls away from the wall of the uterus and gets absorbed into the rest of the woman's system.
Mm.
And frankly, I don't know if that can really happen, but I have met a number of women whose doctors gave them that reason
Mhm.
for no longer being pregnant. Anyway, what happens in the meantime is that little embryo, having been removed by the beings from the woman, that little embryo was taken up on the spacecraft and put into a gestation tank. And some of my clients have witnessed that in some of the regressions they have done. Looks like a big glass tank of fluid, well, big enough to hold a developing baby, that big.
Right.
And that tank seems to be connected to other tanks with other fetuses, embryos, fetuses in them. And then those tanks are connected by tubes and wires to a monitoring machine, which is probably keeping the temperature consistent and the fluids healthy and moving and so forth. So these hybrid babies gestate until they're old enough to be, quote unquote, born. In other
Mhm.
words, taken out of the little tank and raised in the air. And some of these women who had this early pregnancy and then it seemed to disappear, so sometimes months later, they are taken again and taken into the nursery room on the craft and are presented with what may look like a fairly newborn hybrid baby, their own baby. And so different women react in different ways to that. Some of them, immediately feel a surge of love and affection and nurturing. And they are asked by the adult extraterrestrials to hold and nurture and even love this newborn baby. And
Mhm.
some women feel that, and they can and do that. but occasionally there's a human female who's taken and presented with a baby like that. And of course, the babies look sort of like our babies, and yet substantially different, especially in their faces, their eyes and their features. Eyes tend to be bigger and the noses and mouths smaller, and their bodies tend to be sort of thinner and weaker looking, spindlier. And so some women just don't want anything to do with it and can't imagine that they would have had a baby in the first place, and can't imagine why they would have a baby that would look like this. So they are not good nurturers, those babies. The beings apparently have learned over a period of years that if the hybrid babies don't get any nurturing from the human mother, those hybrid babies are likely to not thrive and they will eventually die. But if the newborn and the baby at various stages of afterbirth development will have an occasional visit with the human mother and will be held and nurtured to some extent by the human mother, those are the hybrid babies that tend to really thrive. And I think it makes sense because it's that way with our human babies too.
Right.
You know, the ones who are loved and held and nurtured do much, much better in developing and staying healthy than the poor little babies who don't get that kind of nurturing. So the ETs have learned that very important lesson in their program. Okay, so that's one kind of hybrid. And the second kind is the hybrids who actually are living here on Earth with us. So these hybrids are actually born here of a human mother, the way that we all give birth to our children. And what has happened to create them is that in many cases, the same that I have described for the hybrids who live on the ships, that eggs are taken from the mother, sperm is taken from the father, or if there's no husband, they would be taken from some other man of their choice. That is the choice of the beings, the extraterrestrials. And the fetus is, or the embryo is created, and the extraterrestrial genetics from 2 or 3 or 4, maybe even more extraterrestrial species will be added to that embryo. And then that is implanted on a subsequent occasion into that mother whose eggs they had been using anyway. And in this case, they leave that embryo in the mother and it grows full term in the mother. Now, another way of creating hybrids is that the human mother is already pregnant with a human baby. And along about 7 or 8 months or so in development in the womb, the mother will be taken and the beings will feel her abdomen, feel where the fetus is, and inject their DNA in a solution right through the mother's abdomen and the wall of the uterus and into the fetus. So that fetus is now hybridized. And there's only one of the hybrids whom we studied for this book, Meet the Hybrids. Only one of them did not have either of those procedures done. And she was born here regularly from regular human parents. And when she was 6 years old, she was taken and given those genetics by a group of extraterrestrials. So that is when she became hybridized. She's the only one I know of who had it happen in that particular way, although there may be more that I don't know about.
Right.
So anyway, this hybrid baby, whoever it is born from the mother and is raised just like we raise our babies. And very often there are siblings, other people in the family. And from the very earliest days, the hybrids have felt, not knowing that they were hybrids, but from the very earliest days, they always recognized big differences between them and their family, and differences between them and any other children they ever came in contact with. So some of these differences are things like that they would see an aura, the energy field around somebody, and that wherever they went and whomever they looked at, they would see this energy field. And of course, the energy fields are sometimes very noticeable colors. They might be blue, or they might be green, or they might be yellow. I see enough of them myself too. I don't think I'm a hybrid, but I have seen auras for years now.
Right.
And they can change, and they can bloop out and get closer to the head and then bloop out a big plume here and bubble there. And so these children have always seen that. And they've noticed that when they've commented on that, like saying to a little friend, oh, look at how blue that person's light is
Right.
around him. And the other person said, what do you mean? I don't see that. And they test it out with their family. Their mother and father and siblings say, you've got to be nuts. I don't see anything like that. And so they get feedback that they're different,
Right.
and they're different in lots of ways. I mean, many of them have so many psychic skills that they could just go into a room and knows who has a stomach ache and who has a backache and who has a headache and who has a toothache and who's feeling really good. And and yet no one else in the room seems to notice that. And they also have, from a very, very early age, looked up in the sky a lot. And they'll go outside and look up in the sky, or they'll look out the window and long for their real family that they know somehow is out there, is way out there. And when they say things like this to their own parents, the parents are kind of horrified. Oh, no, I mean, your real family is here. I'm your real mother. I know. I watched you as you were born. It is you. You are my child. And the hybrid person will say, well, I know, but still, my real family is out there and I miss them. And sometimes as children, they'll even run outside at night and look up at the sky and say, why don't you come for me? I miss you. So, I mean, they are sincerely feeling this and sincerely wishing to be with their real family, who really are, most of us would be thinking of them as extraterrestrial beings. And very often too, these hybrids who live here are visited by those beings of various types who gave their genetics, and they welcome those visits. Instead of being afraid of them, creeped out, or mystified, they just welcome them with open arms. Oh, I'm so happy you're here. I'm so happy to see you again. And sometimes the beings will stay around for quite a while, especially if the person has grown up and is living in his or her own dwelling without a whole family around. Sometimes they will stay for hours, just having a really, really enjoyable visit. So this is so different, isn't it, than what we tend to hear about people being so afraid of the beings who come from them and whom they see on the ship. and being really, warded off by it. But in these situations, the people just absolutely love the beings who are their family, in the sense that they gave a good chunk of their genetics to these people. So another commonality is that the hybrids who live on Earth, from a very early age, do some pretty remarkable things. Like if they see a wounded bird, they'll pick up the bird and heal it, just heal it with the energy from their hands. Or I've even known a situation where two little children who were having these experiences with the extraterrestrial beings and had learned healing skills at a remarkably early age, like age 3 and 4 and 5, from their visits on the ships. And yet when another person in their presence here on Earth, like a parent or somebody, is having a wound or a cut or something, that the children will just immediately start sending energy from their hands, sometimes even doing movements that look similar to Tai Chi or Qigong movements, with energy streaming out of their hands that is healing that adult person. And some of these hybrid children realize that they can communicate with animals. And so some of them grow up to be animal communicators, and they can trace lost animals. They can help police departments trace lost animals and lost children, lost anybody.
Right.
And so they have psychic skills that are very practical, and some of them use those skills more publicly than other people do. Anyway, they grow up to feel like they are really here to help to raise the consciousness of humanity. They feel like they are here on a special mission to help humanity, and really they are. The beings have created them in order to be helping humanity. So some of the extraterrestrial beings are really extremely caring and loving of humanity and loving of the earth. Some of the beings are not feeling as loving like that, but some of them definitely are. In fact, I think quite a number of them are very, very benevolent, and they would love to come and do a lot of work on Earth to help to raise humanity's consciousness. But because their physiology is so different and their looks are so different, they really would not be able to survive here. So since they can't come here and do the work, the next best thing they can do is to create these hybrids with whom they'll be in touch throughout their lives. And is like sending them. In fact, the subtitle of our book, Meet the Hybrids, is ET Human Ambassadors on Earth. And these people do feel like they are ambassadors. They don't go around talking about that, but when you really talk to them, they realize, yeah, I feel like I've been especially sent. I've been especially created for doing this, and I'm doing the work that the beings I'm in touch with would like to be able to do and they cannot do. So I'm doing it for them. So they grow up to live a life of total service. So they consult with people. They give webinars, they give seminars live, more and more now, webinars, podcasts, lectures, helping in any way that they can to raise the consciousness of us human beings. And they do healing work. And as I mentioned, the animal rescue work, and use a lot of psychic skills of all for helpful purposes. None of it is for self-aggrandizement or financial gain, even though they might ask for a donation for some of their services, because they, like the rest of us, have to have a place to live and pay their bills. And
Right.
but still, they're not out to make money. That has nothing to do with it except receiving donations to pay the bills. So anyway, they're living a lifetime of service. So this is a background to something else that I came across just a couple of days ago in a regression that I would like to share. And that is that a woman who came for a regression knew that she had been having extraterrestrial experiences for a long time. She remembered 2 or 3 in childhood, and she wondered what was the earliest one that she had had. Well, it turns out when we asked for that in the regression, she went back to being about 6 months old. And that's when she was taken from her crib at home, taken onto the craft. And so this experience came in the form of a 6 months old perspective. And yet she was able to talk, with the adult voice of the woman being regressed. So anyway, she described that she was taken onto a craft up there in the sky, and she was greeted by a tall female, not human, but a female in a long dress, long gown. And the female took her and kind of swayed her, held her very lovingly, and then took her to an apparatus that reminded my client of an incubator. In other words, a sort of a shallow container with light shining down on it. So she was put in this little incubator thing, and there happened to be already in that incubator a boy baby who was even a little bit older. He was bigger anyway. And so they were in the incubator, and the woman, the female ET who put them in there, said, "This is the developer. You're going to have some time for a while in the developer." Now, we never did find out what specifically was being developed, but I thought that was very interesting. And of course, I began to wonder within myself if that woman having the regression might be a hybrid without knowing that she was a hybrid. She had never really considered that. So anyway, the babies stayed in this incubator for a while. It seemed like a couple of hours, and then the same female extraterrestrial came and picked up the little baby girl and the baby boy, one on each arm, and then took them to another room where there were a lot of hybrid babies. Those hybrid babies were not in incubators, but they were big enough to be able to sit up and play on the floor. So they had already developed. And the female said, all these children have had their turn in the developer as well. So she didn't really give more information about that, but we were, the woman I was regressing later after the regression, we're sort of speculating about that maybe that was helping to enhance the genetic influence from species. Or anyway, it seemed to be for enhancing and maybe further developing these babies who turned out to be hybrid babies. So after that regression, and I brought her out of the hypnotic state, and we usually talk for a little while afterwards too, and see what their response is about the whole thing. And they usually want to express things about it. And I said, so it certainly sounds like when you were a baby, you were taken to be with these other hybrid babies. Have you ever considered that maybe you too are a hybrid? And she hadn't really given a lot of thought to that. She'd wondered about herself in various times because she too had abilities that most of the people she knew in her life didn't have. So we sort of went through a roster of what her special abilities are, psychic abilities and so forth. And it also was very clear that she is here on a mission too, with a particular kind of work that she does. So that was just a sort of a new little additional part of the hybrid process that I got to be aware of just a couple of days ago.
Well, the photographer in me is a little aghast that they didn't take her out of the developer and immediately put her in the stop bath. But that's an old photography thing. I have to ask you, going forward, someone who's a hybrid, 5 generations down the road, they still have that DNA. Don't
Yes.
their children have characteristics? Isn't there a generational
Well,
hybrid?
yes, good question.
Excuse me.
Some of the children do seem to have a lot of those abilities from the original hybrid who's living here. And some of them either don't have those abilities or they're just not apparent yet.
Or they've repressed them.
Noticed, yeah. And so they may still come out with them later in life. But you're making a very good point that the DNA from the mother will continue with any human children she will subsequently have. Yeah. And that may be part of the whole deal too, of the hybrid program for some of the groups anyway, some of the species that they may be wanting to affect the whole population eventually, generation by generation, by adding their DNA to certain people here, probably to certain people all over the world. And so, in other words, we're having this added to our overall gene pool. And so far, my opinion is that whatever that DNA is, it's bringing good qualities that we respect and admire and can really benefit from. So if these hybrids, or I should say, since these hybrids are here to give service and to upgrade the consciousness of humanity and the behavior of humanity as well, I think that is a real service coming from space. Space being a real service to Earth. And if it's becoming more widespread, like with the succeeding generations, like you are suggesting, that means that maybe over time, maybe not too awfully much time, maybe another generation or two, more humans or enough humans will have this kind of influence that society really gets better. We have a lot to overcome here with the greed, with the dishonesty, with the wars going on continually, with control attempts and successes. There's just, the crime, the harming of other people, the trafficking of people for various purposes. I mean, we have an awful lot going on here that is really terrible. and the more that good can be done within all of humanity, certainly the better. And I think that these other beings, even though they live so far away, as far as we can tell, they know an awful lot about Earth and humanity. I don't know whether they do remote viewing per se, but they must do some kind of very, very long range knowing about us. I mean, I have been astonished in a conversation I used to have with an extraterrestrial being through somebody's channeling. I was just astonished with what they knew about us. And yet we know so little about them relatively. So from my point of view, every regression to an extraterrestrial experience is very valuable because we learn a little tiny bit more about them while they, in the meantime, are knowing a whole lot about us. It's a very intriguing thing.
Well, it seems to me as the vibrational frequency increases, that it's what everything points to, which is love. And so at the top, it's love, and it's unconditional love, which is not, by the way, enablement. A lot of people confuse unconditional love with enablement. And if you love me, you do this for me. No, that's enablement.
It's not
But
unconditional.
you don't, if you're operating on that frequency of unconditional love, the minutia doesn't really matter. It's the opportunities for love.
Right.
So I don't need to know a whole lot about them because, you know, if they're there reflecting their facet of love, that's enough for me personally. You know, it's here on Earth that we get caught up in the minutia of, you know, this little flake of metal is valuable. This little rock that's shiny is valuable, you know, and I'm sure in certain uses and usefulness that may be, you know, transferable universally, but not to the extent it's been created here on this planet for, you know, purposes of setting it apart and manipulating it and controlling it. But you know, it's really just, it's simple, you know. And but you know, how can you sell that? How can you sell love? You know, how can you make a profit from that? And yeah, exactly. So you've got to kind of attach some sort of value and consequence and all of that to make it work in a low frequency mindset.
Low frequency. You got it. Yes, I know. And you see, these beings are working on the hybrid beings living here, and the beings out there, I think, are so many of them working on a much, much higher frequency, totally different intent. You know, money and fame and greed and property and all of that. Ego, right. Nothing to do. Those beings are just not oriented toward that sort of thing at all. Maybe they were millions of years ago, who knows? But they're not now. And the hybrids who live here are not that way. I mean, they want a place to live, and they want clothes on their body, they want health care, they want food, you know, naturally. We have to have that to live here. But, you know, beyond that, they may want some item of beauty in their home. That's not a necessity, but a beautiful painting or something. But they might wear gemstones because they have medicinal and spiritual properties. But if they keep their lives, the ones whom I personally know, keep their lives very simple. So an interesting thing is that a lot of people have been coming to me this last couple of years, especially wanting to know what their real purpose is in life. That's what some of my regressions are focused on, because that's what the person wants. It could be a woman. There are more women who are coming for that particular reason so far, but there are some men who come for that too. And I'm very pleased. So these are all people who have been working in jobs, earning a living, paying their bills and so forth. And in some cases, they've been really just moving right up the corporate ladder and are really having great, material success. And yet they've gotten to a point in their lives, they may be in their 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s, and they're at a point where they think, I just have always felt that there is something else I'm supposed to be doing here that is really more servicing of people. And I don't quite know what it is. So they will come for that regression. And the wonderful thing is that these people get wonderful answers from their own higher knowing, their own soul wisdom.
Well, a lot of that capacity as far as a career is dogma. You go into your father's business, that type of thing. And
right.
so when you get to the higher self can get beyond that and cut through the nonsense and communicate the true purpose of the soul contract.
Right.
Now,
And some people find it's difficult to even know what their own higher self is thinking. Or maybe they've gotten messages from their higher self, but they don't know whether they can totally trust it.
right.
So they'll come for a regression. And in the regression, instead of going back into the past or going into an extraterrestrial experience, I direct them to be open to having information from their soul, their higher self, and even guided by their spirit guides. So, and they do get meaningful information from those regressions. Sometimes it turns out that they're going to have to leave the job that's a good job, paying very well beyond their bills. But they now recognize, this is the area of service I need to go into. And once in a while, there's a woman or a man who comes and they do a regression of this type, and they realize that, I already am doing that. I've been doing that for a few years, and that gives them a very helpful validation that they're on the right track, a confirmation. So that's really worthwhile for them too. But I'm very, very pleased that more and more people are coming wanting to know what their real purpose is. It always has something to do with some sort of service to others, to other people, or in some cases, animals. For some people, both people and animals. So I'm glad that that's developing here and there in this society. We certainly need it.
And along that tangent, recently, before we run out of time, there's been disclosure and validation that the authorities have discovered that they have recovered remains that are not human from UFO crashes.
Right.
And I just wanted you to give your idea of why they are now disclosing that, because this isn't new information to them.
Well, they're disclosing information that some of us have known for a long time. I mean, I've known about it since about 1990. But anyway, Yes, I think it's very notable and significant that just yesterday, in the U.S. Congress, with both sides of the party, both parties there, that there were several witnesses who gave excellent testimonies, presentations that were beautifully organized, and they were beautifully presented about the material they knew about, whether it was sightings, watching these exotic crafts from somewhere else, or in some cases, even having seen bodies of the beings of those crafts. And so that was more publicly, officially
Mm.
announced
Entered into the record.
yeah, than
But I
ever.
want your opinion on why now. What has prompted this now?
I can only make some guesses.
Of course.
One of them is that there's more and more information out in the public about UFOs and the other beings, and there are more and more conferences, more and more books being written about it, more and more information on the internet, and many different places on the internet. So I think part of it is that they've had to realize that, the public is really becoming, the public is way ahead of what we're saying.
Right.
And we've got to start coming clean. And more and more people now are reporting sightings that so many people did not report UFO sightings before because they weren't paid attention to. They'd call the police and the police would say, oh, no, we don't take that kind of information, or, well, we don't know anything about that, or, you must have been hallucinating, or whatever, and they'd call the Air Force bases and get the same kind of treatment. And so much was denied, or they would try to bring it up to their congressman or their representative and say, no, we just don't know about that. And so anyway, they never got anywhere with that, and a lot of people have given up. However, there are these UFO reporting centers now collecting thousands of witness testimonies. So all of this is growing more and more in this country, and I think that that's true in other countries as well. So it could be that the government just realized, hey, the public is way ahead of us on this. We maybe we better start giving out something here.
Right.
I want to float something past you, because my understanding is that there's levels of authoritarian power that are in contact with extraterrestrials and have been for a while. There's a lot of developments in aircraft that are credited with superior technology that didn't exist before. What I used to do with my son, and I didn't do it that often, but sometimes it was necessary, and I would look at him and say, okay, we're going to do this. We can do it the easy way, or we can do it the hard way, but we're doing it. You pick the way. And I wonder personally what you think of the fact that, being that we're on the verge of destroying the planet, that somebody has finally said to these people, look, you can either be part of this or be pushed aside by it. And that is what
go down with the rest of us.
I'm sorry?
You can go down with the rest of us.
Well, we're not going down, but you can go down because you're going to sit there in denial, and we have to do something so we can do it together, or you can just be pushed aside by it. And I'm wondering if you think that may have led to some of this disclosure.
I think that really probably a bunch of things. And that what you just mentioned may be one of them, among others. So I just think it's good that it is coming out, that people can report what they have seen, and all of these people in our services and our pilots are now not only free to, but are encouraged to report the sightings. So, it's very good. I think that the government, whoever the government really is, but at least in Congress, it's been recognized and promoted that these things are really happening. These sightings are real. Even they even mentioned crashed UFOs and remains of bodies. And it was somewhere, I've forgotten now which person said it, but it was even said that these are not human remains, or they're
Right.
not from this planet. So, I mean, these are huge steps to
To
be.
enter this into the record, absolutely.
and-
Before we go, is there something that you want to share with people as a resource if they have more questions, or if they want to get to you for regressions, or is there anything you effectively want us to help get out there?
Okay, yes. Well, I would like for people to know about my website, because on the website, there's a place where they can type in an email, basically, and it will get forwarded to my email address. So if that would be a good way to contact me if they want a regression, or want me to be a speaker or a guest on a program or whatever. And it's also a website where they can order the books if they're interested in ordering the books. And when they come from me rather than coming from Amazon, I write them a little message in the book in ink with my signature. Some people don't care about that, but some people really do. They really, oh, that's a special edition.
Right.
So I do
So
that.
what
So
website would that be?
that's Barbara Lamb Regressions, plural, an S on the end of Barbara Barbara
Right.
Lamb Regressions.com. And there's also my YouTube channel I would like to mention, which is
Please.
YouTube Barbara Lamb ET Regressions. And I have a number of podcasts. Maybe this eventually will be on it as well. And interviews and podcasts of various types, some lectures that I've given, and about different aspects of these various phenomena. And in the YouTube channel, I'm talking about a different subject each time, about things that tend to be along the paranormal idea that I have had experience with, and or my clients have had experience with, without naming anybody.
Right.
And so there about OBEs, UFO sightings I've had, UFO or ET encounters that I have had, about the hybrids, about walk-ins, about spirit visitations that I've had, about evidences that I have seen of spirits visiting. In other words, just a few of the subjects, but just showing that they're about these kind of unusual things that not everybody experiences every day.
And give us that channel again, please, Barbara.
Yes, YouTube, Barbara Lamb ET Regressions. Yeah, so that
Thank
should
you.
Thank you.
simple enough to remember. I'd like to just say one final thing.
Sure.
The hearing that was happening in Congress yesterday, and that is that there's always the thought that this can be presented as a very fearful subject. Of course, people in our government are concerned about national security. I mean, that's good that they are concerned and understandable. But there is a danger, I think, that all of these UFOs that are seen could be considered a threat when they really are not a threat. So far, in all of the history that we know about in the world, there's been no harm or destruction done by a UFO. And so to look at them as a fearful menace that may deserve being shot out of the sky, and a multi-billion-dollar industry being developed just to shoot them down, I really worry about that, because a lot of them I think are really here to help, and I do not think that they're here to take over the earth, even though there are some theories of that sort floating around out there. So I just hope that as more and more information comes out, it will not be presented as a big national or worldwide threat, because I personally don't believe that it is a threat.
Yeah, I don't believe there's a threat either, and I believe that they're actually trying to help humanity and the earth
Yes,
exist and
Continue to exist.
right. I think so too.
Thank you, Barbara.
So I just caution everybody in listening to whatever is publicly given out about this. I caution you not to think that whatever news comes out about it being a threat is real, because I don't think it is. It's a mystery to us,
Right.
definitely, but it's not, as far as I know, a threat. I would hate to see innocent beings and innocent crafts who are actually caring about the earth and looking to see how the earth is doing with all the smokestacks and the coal burning and the nuclear material and everything we've got going here, all the gasoline and the fumes, etc. They're checking us out, I think, because they care and they want us to do well,
Yes.
not to ruin ourselves.
They're trying to stop us from killing ourselves, basically.
Yeah.
Destroying ourselves.
And one doesn't have to go any further than the Orson Welles radio broadcast to see
Yes.
what the documented outcome of the fear mongering would be.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining us, Barbara.
You're very welcome.
It was
Sure.
great seeing you again, and thank you again for joining us. And please come back anytime you want.
Okay.
We'd
What
love
you-
to have you and hear more, because I believe you have so much information that would benefit so many people. So
Oh, great. Well, I appreciate what the two of you are doing.
thank you.
It's
you.
up for people to listen to and to know about. That's absolutely great.
Well, I appreciate what Glenda's doing, and I hope your optimism rubs off on her so she can appreciate what I'm doing.
Well, I hope so too.
Thank you, Barbara.
All right.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much. You have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You
Stay
too.
with us.
Bye.